This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
Thank you again for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast. Of course, a huge thanks goes out to our regular contributor and co-host, Chris. You can support Beyond the Big Screen podcast two great ways. One is by leaving an Apple Podcast rating and review. And a second way is by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen. By joining Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon, there's many great benefits to you, and you really help keep this show sustainable for a long time in the future. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Richard Lim's This American President. More can be found at parthenonpodcast.com. You can learn more about Beyond the Big Screen, great movies and stories so great they should be movies, by going over to our website, a2zhistorypage.com. I thank you for joining me again, Beyond the Big Screen. Welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen. I'm Steve, and again, I am joined by Chris, who's a budding podcaster and friend who I'm always talking movies with. So we're here again to talk about, I dare say, classic Total Recall, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sharon Stone, Ronnie Cox, Michael Ironside. And this is a science fiction story about memory, Total Recall, and it's based on the 1966 Philip K. Dick short story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. Chris, how you doing today?
Doing quite good. Yeah, you called it a classic. I think like anyone like in our age group, yeah, this is a classic movie. Like I must have watched it, I don't know, like 100 times. It was also one of those movies that was like, they always played on TV too. I noticed like TBS and stuff like that always have like replays of like Total Recall and stuff like that. I remember, thinking about it, just how violent this movie is. It probably wasn't the best movie for me to be watching when I was a kid, but, I think my dad liked it. So he just, and he knew I liked it. So he just let me watch it. Right. So.
And please, people, don't watch the 2012 version. Well, I mean, obviously you can watch it, but it's just nothing compared to the 1990 classic.
Yeah, I watched a bit. I remember watching a bit of it and I turned it off.
So in this episode, we are going to go through the movie, and obviously we will give spoilers as we always do. But like I've always said, watch the movie, listen to this, watch the movie again, and I think you'll get more. And we always love to hear what you have to say about our conversations. And today we're going to focus in on a lot of the aspects of the sci-fi, the world building, and we're going to fold in a lot of what Philip K. Dick brought in through his book. He was long dead before this movie was made. And I always wonder what Philip K. Dick, because the only movie that he was around for was made during his life was Blade Runner, and he hated it. And I kind of wonder what he would have thought of this movie and its portrayal, but I guess we'll never know that. And so really the movie is Hauser trying to figure out what's real, what's not real. He's trying to thwart Richter's plan and Cohagen's plan, and they go back and forth. He's involved in this grand conspiracy. The whole thing is Cohagen is trying to he's trying to hold down the insurgency amongst the mutated riffraff, you might call them, on Mars, who's actually doing the work. And he's trying to hide the secret of this alien technology that could potentially either destroy the planet or give it an atmosphere.
The head of the Quado tells him before he's killed, he says, you have to set off this alien reactor, right? It's our only hope. Quaid ends up getting to the reactor and he sets it off, which is, as you pointed out, the reactor sets off the tribinium glacier and it releases a gas that bursts to the surface and forms a breathable atmosphere. And it just happens like really quickly.
Really, the main issues of the movie for me are, is it real? Is it not real for Quaid? Because he's really right off from the bat. his mind has been tinkered with. Like, even if it is just a dream, whatever recall has done to him, that's kind of like the expository right there. Is it a dream? Is it an implanted memory, or is it real? Then I think the secondary issue for me was this this relationship that Cohagen has as almost the dictator of Mars. There's a kind of an idea, I don't know if there is certainly the idea of class struggle, but I think also of colonization. There's definitely the idea there. And then you also throw in like I think that, kind of, it's interesting to think of the alien issue and, using this alien power. Is it an absolute good? When you don't know what something is like that, of actually employing it, do you just go ahead and do it or not? And I think that almost softens Cohagen at the end.
Yeah, I would argue. Well, I mean, in terms of the movie, I would be like, well, I don't know, what was he going to do? Like, I mean, he doesn't set off the alien reactor, or does. If he doesn't, I mean, everyone's going to die in Venusville, right? And in terms of like Cohagen, yeah, you're right. Like, he's a total, he says that right off the bat. He's like, as long as the tribunium's getting mined, I can do whatever I want. Like, you find out in the movie that he's literally taxing people for air. So just to breathe, he's taxing people, and he's raising the taxes on that, right? Yeah, but I mean, in terms of Quaid, didn't really have much of a choice. I guess he had to set it off, right? Maybe it would have turned out bad. I mean, the alternative was to die, basically, right?
Yeah, for him at that point, he had to do it, but he was gung-ho to do it anyways. I think Cohagen really painted himself in a corner with that one, because he has to protect the tribunium, and he cannot let this alien technology go. He's fighting to keep it a secret. And it almost reminded me a lot of almost like the Wild West. Like, this is a mining town. There's wealth there because obviously there's a Hilton, there's big cities. What the other thing was interesting is that the colony couldn't have been that old, because Cohagen was there from the beginning.
Yeah, when you bring up the Wild West, and like Cohagen could be, he's the corrupt sheriff.
Yeah.
And I've often thought about like that in terms of like, let's say down the road in history, we end up kind of colonizing Mars. It would kind of be like the Wild West, really. Like, you're shut off from like the main colony, and you'd be pretty much left alone to do whatever you wanted. They might come and visit every once in a while, but yeah, you pretty much would be left totally alone, like in the Wild West, or even how the British ran like a lot of their colonies, right? The American colonies were just like, just do this and this, and then just go do whatever you want, right? So I've often thought about that, and yeah, you said it perfectly. Like, yeah, it's like the Wild West.
Because I think a Mars colony would really have to, the whole aim of it would have to be self-sufficiency right off the bat. It couldn't rely on, no matter what, it's going to take months, and in certain times of the year, I guess you might say, but at certain cycles, it could take even longer than months to get any sort of things from Earth to Mars. So if there ever was a colony, or there was some reason to be on Mars, like to mine something or to do something, it would have to be going on its own straight off the bat. And it's interesting, a lot of science fiction kind of portrays it that way.
Yeah. If just a tangent, like anybody's like interested in terms of like just like Mars exploration or what have you, I suggested this book to you too. It's a book called The Case for Mars. I listened to it on Audible, and it's a really interesting book. It breaks it down kind of like how we could do it, and the steps of like colonization of Mars, and it's really well done. Just for any of your audience members that are interested more like kind of the hard science behind something like that, right?
Moving on, I think if we get into it, the real meat of the issue of the book and of the movie is it real? Are what's happening in the movie, is it real, or is it just playing out of the recall, what the essentially the recall was an implanted memory of a vacation that Quaid wanted of being a secret agent going to Mars. And I think that's the real issue. And so what do you think? Do you think in the end, like if you had to stake your flag, is it real or is it all a memory implanted?
I think it's funny because I remember it's been a little while since I had watched the movie. And then I rewatched it, and I remember thinking for the longest time, like, no, it's real. But then I rewatched the movie and I'm like, I don't know, I'm leaning towards the side that it's all an implant right from the get-go. As soon as you opening scene, you're already in the Total Recall. The reason I think it's set up because it's I don't know, it's just like it's set up so perfectly. Like right from the get-go, you're already kind of like, I don't know, he's having these dreams about Mars, and then his wife Lori is trying to tell him, no, you can't go to Mars. His co-worker at work is telling him, no, don't go to Total Recall. And then when he gets to the Total Recall, basically like they lay out the whole thing, like right there. It's like they're like, oh, there's going to be an alien artifact. The alien artifact looks exactly in the Total Recall that they show him. The pictures looks exactly like the one at the end of the movie. And then like the sales guy, it's just like little things. Like the sales guy mentions about like, oh yeah, you're going to check in at the Hilton Hotel, right? Like when he's initially trying to sell him the Total Recall. And this is even before he mentions the ego trip. And then like he gets to Mars, and where does he check in? The Hilton Hotel. And then like one of the doctors, this is something I noticed the second time I watched it. So there's the main female doctor. I guess she's like the lead implant doctor. And then she has her help, and her help goes, he just mentioned something in passing. He goes, oh, blue sky on Mars. That's new. And at the end of the movie, that's exactly what happens. It's a blue sky on Mars, right? And even the doctor, like when the doctor's trying to convince him to wake up from his Total Recall, the doctor tells him literally the entire plot of the movie up to the end, exactly how it's going to happen, and it happens perfectly. Like to me, this seems like it's like a very a very elaborate and very intense like memory implant of him being like a secret agent. It's played the only way that, to me, I used to think the first time I watched it, I thought like, okay, well, the dream starts like as soon as he visits Total Recall. But the more I think about it, I think it's right off the bat, the whole thing's a dream, because it works so perfectly in that sense. And then at the end of the movie, at the very end of the movie, typically movies fade to black, right? This one, it fades to white. And you can interpret that in like different ways. Like, oh, is he just waking up from his dream, right? He's waking up from his Total Recall. It's like he's opening his eyes, and it's like, oh, it's turning white. You can also interpret it as in a very dark way, where the doctor warned him, like, hey, buddy, like if you don't wake up from this, you're going to get lobotomized. And, that's what's happening there is he's getting lobotomized, right? So yeah, those are my main arguments for why it's a dream.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. The main reason that I think it's real is that he goes into Total Recall and he asks exactly for kind of like playing off what you're saying is what he asked for. He was the driver of everything. Everything that he asked for, it came from him. And that would make sense that if they did put in false memories, and they had called it, I think, the memory cap, and what they were doing was kind of trying to scrape out all the memories that he had and put in these new false memories of him being just a working Joe on a construction site in some city on Earth. And it just seemed like to me that everything that happened afterwards, it was realistic, and it unfolded from there. And I think that doctor who confronts him in the Hilton, he is bluffing. That's how I read it, is that he was bluffing. And Arnold points it out when he sees the guy sweating. And I think you could always go, and that's probably the thing that Verhoeven was really going for, is that you could play any one of those events either way. And I think that one, could it have been his memory and this implant that they did, that this was going to play out as him being a secret agent. I think the one thing, and it's kind of meta, and you have to drag yourself out, is why would a company implant a memory like this and implant it as it was real? Like if they had implanted it as a virtual reality thing, and you knew that these memories are vivid memories that you can enjoy later in life, but if you thought that they were real, you'd go insane.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, that's like, to me, that's a good argument for it being real, right? Like, I mean, well, you seen he shoots his wife in the head.
Yeah, how could you ever live after that?
And he had no choice in the matter either, because she was trying to kill him, right? You know, in reality or in the Total Recall, right? Like, it's true. Like, how would you, like, you just go home and be like, love you, honey, you know, what's for dinner?
Like, just that you could never dial back. Just that one alone.
The one thing too, though, is in terms, like, at the beginning of the movie, they're all trying to get him to not go to the recall center, right? But the plan hinges on him going to the recall center, does it not? For him to get that triggered, right? So why would they, unless the timeline, like, say, unless they had a timeline or something like that, but like, unless he goes to the recall center, his repressed memories don't get triggered, right? So why would Laurie and Harry and these other people tell him to not go to the recall center?
They don't want him to go to the recall because they don't want recall to mess with what they had done to his memory, and who knows what, you know, if they had no idea what would have happened if recall got in there and started digging around.
Yeah, that's true, I guess. But then, unless they had some other way of triggering the chain of events that leads to like Quaid being like the double agent or what have you, right? For Hauser, or, you know, Hauser being like the inside man, or I always interpreted like, well, he had to go to the Total Recall because that's what was going to trigger it.
You know what's the other step that I think is the thing that really got me is he was, so in that later scene where Melina and Hauser, they're caught and Cohagen puts them into his own recall machine to finally completely wipe Quaid's memory and Melina's memory and put him back into the role of Hauser. He was in the machine for quite a long time. That could have been the point where anything after that was a dream.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that, but yeah, that's very possible. Yeah, I mean, Cohagen has like probably one of the better, like, Ronnie Cox that just makes such a good bad guy. Like, he's so good at it. He was so good at it in RoboCop, and he's so good at it in this movie. And he's like, he goes to like Melina, and it's just like, yeah, you're gonna be like a good woman, obedient, stuff like that. Oh, it was so good. They don't make bad guys like that anymore in movies, man. Like, I love that whole scene. I love him in general. He just plays the bad guy so well. And like when he shuts the air off on Mars, and they're like, oh, you're gonna turn it back on? He's like, no. Has no reason to not turn it back on at that point. You know, it's just, I know, it's very well done. Yeah, but I never even thought about it. Maybe that's where it gets triggered, and everything from that point is part of the recall. I never even crossed my mind watching the movie.
Ronnie Cox is the bad guy. It's that final scene that where he doesn't, Ronnie Cox or Cohagen, he doesn't want that to be triggered. And it's just so weird to me that he almost seems like he cares for, and maybe he just cares for the part of the planet that he, you know, that he's created, the high end of the planet that has a Hilton, and not the mutated people who live in the wrong side of the tracks. I mean, it's literally the red light district of Mars. But it's so weird. And I don't know how how that was supposed to be interpreted at the end. He genuinely seemed to care that the planet was going to be destroyed, and he must have known he was going to die at the end, because I mean, everybody was going to get sucked out into the void of Mars.
Well, it's also like a very rational position to like have too. Like if the aliens were going to leave like some technology that we're going to, it's a very like, it makes a lot of sense to think it was like a doomsday switch. You know what I mean? Like if everything screws up, like we can flip this switch and like that's it. It's over. Right. I mean, that's what I would think. If like the aliens left some kind of technology like that, I think like that's probably if it was me in real life, I feel like that's probably the position I would take, right? To bring it a little bit to reality, the whole alien thing on Mars is it's interesting. This is like a little tangent for me or what have you. Like if you look at the entire lifespan of Mars, right? You know, and like the scientists, they theorize, they have some pretty good arguments that like at one point Mars actually did have a denser atmosphere, right? And they probably did have water, but this was like billions of years ago or what have you, right? Like wouldn't it be interesting to think that like there was some alien species on there and that they had built one of these like doomsday devices, right? And the things got really screwed up and they switched it off or whatever, and that's where the atmosphere, like it destroyed the atmosphere or what have you. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. Like the alien artifact thing, I always thought was an interesting idea, because who knows how old it is.
Yeah. Well, the Cohagen says it's a billion, 500,000, 500 million. Like he doesn't really know. And I think they kind of get to that like nobody really knows how old it is. And they really do leave the alien technology. It's completely a blank slate. They don't get into it whatsoever.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see if they'd done a second movie, if that was like, if they were going to expand on the alien technology stuff there. But you know, I don't understand how it never got a second movie, to be honest. It was a huge success and it was a big movie for Arnold, and it put Paul Verhoeven into, you know, superstardom territory. You know, he had like 3 hits in a row. He did RoboCop, Total Recall, and then he did Basic Instinct, and then and then he did Showgirls, which really hurt him.
I don't know. I mean, that's a good thing to, maybe we can talk about that and that kind of start to cruise towards the conclusion. Is I don't know what they would do in a Total Recall 2. It would have to be based on that it was real then.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was saying. I think I was reading about earlier is apparently like Paul Verhoeven's very like, he won't ever say whether it's real or not, but apparently like when it was almost getting a sequel, he was leaning towards it like, oh yeah, this was real, right? I mean, if you could do it if it was all a dream and then you just do a different recall with a different story, right? Which, I mean, is an interesting idea. You could do probably a franchise of films like that where each movie is like a different recall and you're watching like this guy, like a fantasy of, you know, new people or what have you, right?
But then it really doesn't give you anything to, you know, who cares? Then, you know, it's just
that's the problem is like, yeah, that would be the problem, right? Because you would be like, oh, this is all fake, right?
Yeah,
so
there'd be like no reason to really engage in it if it was fake. And if it's real, then what? Like Arnold becomes, I guess you could maybe have it something where like Arnold has to really come to terms with that he was Hauser and Quaid. You know what? Might be a cool movie if they came out with it now and he completely leans into being Hauser in the end. Yeah. Like that could be a really cool movie.
Yeah, I've heard there's always I don't know if it'll ever get made, but there's always been like rumors about, apparently Arnold really wants to do another Conan movie, but he wants to do it where like he's Conan and he's like the old king or what have you, right? Where like they could do like a Total Recall, but like Arnold is like he's now, right? He's like 70 something and he's embraced being Hauser and like he's like ruling Mars, and it's like, but he's turned into like Cohagen.
Yeah, that could be really cool.
Like, I think that could be a really cool idea. If like the 2012, right? It was 2012, the remake or whatever, the Total Recall they did. Yeah, I didn't like that one very much. Like, if you were to like say remake Total Recall, I think the only direction to really go in is to, I mean, like use like Christopher Nolan's Inception as a template and really play off like do it like really serious and like really focus in on like Quaid's like memories and like what he remembers, doesn't remember, what's real, what's not real, where Verhoeven in this is just what Verhoeven does and he does it really well. He makes movies that are like they're fun joy rides with like a lot of message, like social messaging and like interesting like philosophical questions mixed in with all the mayhem and the violence and the explosions, right? This is an idea that I was thinking because I was reading the short story, and the short story in terms of tone is a lot different than the movie. It's much more like you're basically like listening to like a paranoid, like schizophrenic, really, and it's much bleaker. And I'm like, well, yeah, if you were going to do this movie again, like that's how I would make it more like that, like just much more like serious, because you're not going to do a better joyride than Paul Verhoeven, right? So you're not going to do a funner movie. People have tried and most of them fail. So
yeah, I think that and what it's always stuck with me since the first time I ever saw the Total Recall to the time I watched it 2 days ago before this, is he creates such a complete world on Mars. Like even in the city on Earth, he created the future that's still even today. What is that? That's carry the one 31 years later. It still feels like the future. Watching that,
it's amazing. He was always very like hands on with like the special effects and everything like that too. He always wanted the special effects to be perfect. Yeah, and he just like Verhoeven he's such a fascinating like director where like Verhoeven could do something like I mentioned Showgirls, right? Like Verhoeven could do like Total Recall, right? And then a couple of years later he does like Showgirls. Like there's no like Verhoeven, he only swings for the home run, right? And most of the time he hits the home run, right? But he's like one of these filmmakers, and it's I've talked to you about this before, where there's not many of them in Hollywood anymore. Like guys that like, I don't know, like legitimately like taking risks on these bigger budget like action movies, right? It's a lot of it's been replaced, and I get why Hollywood does it. Like a lot of the Marvel movies or what have you, right? Because they're safe bets, right? They're non-offensive movies for the most part, but I look at like what Verhoeven was able to accomplish with like Total Recall and RoboCop, and down the road we're going to talk about Starship Troopers. It's incredible what he was able to do, and he had these huge successes, and they were all R-rated, which is the craziest part. Like people say like R-rated movies now, they say like R-rated action movies, like, oh, they don't sell. It's like, I mean, Verhoeven proved that wasn't the case for the longest time. You know, like RoboCop is the last movie that we talked about. It's basically like creating a comic book character, an original comic book character. It just happened to be on film this time, right? And like Total Recall in a lot of ways is like, it's like a graphic novel when you're reading it. Like it almost seems like something that could be like Frank Miller or somebody like read Philip K's book and it's like, oh, I'm going to expand on the secret agent part, you know? And he does he's just so brilliant at it, you know? And he like the music, the lighting, the action sequences, like it's just when Verhoeven hits it out of the park, he's amazing. He's one of the best, in my opinion.
I really liked the boringness of Mars in a lot of ways, that you know, he stays at the Hilton Mars, and you have people just like eating their hotel breakfast at the, you know, it's just, you're on Mars, but you could be in Poughkeepsie too. Like it's such a it's so discordant, and it's, you know, it has these two different things lined up, but it just works. And I think that's what really makes this movie work at every step of the way.
Yeah, like you pointed out, like it's believable, like the way like Mars has like a red light district. Like most movies nowadays would be like, oh, we're on Mars, and it's like I don't know, they'll make it seem kind of cool where like Verhoeven's gonna be like, of course there's gonna be hookers on Mars and people doing drugs. Like, why would there not be, you know? Like, and he'll go in that area, right? And that's what makes it believable, right? And like where would like, of course, like a secret agent who would be, you know, like a double secret agent, of course he's gonna run into these people because I mean that's where the crime's happening, right? Like that's where the rebellion would take place, right? Like it's where like, yeah, that's what makes Verhoeven like a very interesting, not interest, like that's what makes Verhoeven great is the fact that like he'll do these, they seem like little things, but it's what makes the whole thing believable, right? Even like like RoboCop too, right? Like it's a ridiculous story, but like yeah, it's an exaggerated version of Detroit, but it seemed like the whole time you're watching the movie, it's believable. Like I could see like in 60 years maybe something crazy like this happening, right? Like it's not it takes place in that weird spot where it's like it's not total fantasy and it's not like total reality. It's like that perfect spot, like right in the middle.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. And what I really think is that what he created was a really great spy drama, suspense drama in a sci-fi world. Like it's really, when you boil it down, it was a really good spy drama. It kind of like, in thinking about it now, it reminds me a lot of Mel Gibson's Apocalypto. All of that world building of the Mayas was really for a chase movie. And it was the perfect chase movie, but everything like them speaking Mayan and the pyramids and like just the perfect background was all to get you lost in a really great chase movie.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Right. Like, like I said, like Verhoeven's one of the, and he's also like, I mentioned this in the notes too, is the music in this movie is incredible. Like it gets your blood pumping. It's like right off the bat, as soon as like the opening credits are coming down and it's like the red Total Recall coming down and the music's pumping, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm ready.
It's just so weird too that I don't know if my nostalgia has blinded me to it. This does, and I'd love to maybe watch, and especially our younger audience out there who's watching this for the first time, it does not feel dated to me. I would not say that this is a 30, plus year movie. It just doesn't feel that way.
It doesn't. No, it does. It feels like, I mean, some of the graphics could get updated, I guess, but I mean, you could make this movie now and it with maybe slightly updated graphics, and it would fit right in. And it's something that I think Hollywood desperately needs is some like cool original action movies, you know? Like it's crazy to think like not that when we were like growing up, not even that long ago, like, you know, they like Hollywood would make stuff like The Matrix, you know, or they'd make stuff like Total Recall, or they make stuff like Starship Troopers, or you know, those are just movies right off the top of my head, right? And these were all like original worlds that they were making. I just find it hard. Like to me, I look at it and I'm like, would something like Total Recall even get made nowadays? I don't know.
I think that oftentimes with the movies, they don't have, with the movies like the Total Recall We Shall Not Speak Of from 2012, it didn't have a story to it. It had a lot of cool effects, but in the end, it really didn't have that underlying that basic conflict that makes a good story that you can put all sorts of bells and whistles. But if you don't have a good story, it's not a movie that's going to have staying power. And I've done movies on comic book movies, and I just wonder if when this fad kind of passes, whether we're going to look back and say that these movies don't have the staying power because they don't have an underlying story to them.
Yeah, that's how I feel. Like I think like a couple of them will have staying power. Like I think in terms of comic book movies, I think like the Nolan Batmans will. I think people will. I think those will have staying power. I think yeah, that's about it, to be honest with you. Like, I mean, that sounds like I'm ripping on the comic book fans or comic book movies. I just find like with a lot of these Marvel movies is like, I mean, they're fun. Like I'll watch them with my daughter once in a while. Like they're fun. The special effects are kind of cool, but they're not, I'm not going to look at like Captain America in 30 years or something and think you have the same, it's not going to have the same staying power that like Total Recall has or RoboCop. I just don't think it will. I think it'll just, I don't know, it'll just be kind of forgotten. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's what I struggle with is do I just not get these movies? Because I would say that honestly, I was never a comic book fan. Like even when movies were coming out or when the comic books were coming out originally, I wasn't that into them and didn't have a ton of interest in them. So maybe I don't have that now.
I mean, I was a bit like I read Batman. I like The Punisher, but I mean, the movies are coming out. And I've literally never even heard of these superheroes, some of these guys. And I'm like, and I mean, to me, I think to myself, like, what point does it give? Like, okay, like, like we've done it all. You know what I mean? But I mean, is this, I wouldn't even be ragging on like comic book movies so much. If they were still producing like original, and good, not just original, but and good, like sci-fi action movies in Hollywood. And they're not really, like, I mean, John Wick, I guess, is kind of cool, but I mean, it's not Total Recall. Like, you don't watch a John Wick movie and go like, what is the nature of memories? What, you know what I mean? Like, what would happen if you could implant memories in a human? Like I was saying at the beginning, when we were talking earlier, I go like, well, what if a cult like got their hands on this type of technology? You know what I mean? Like, and started implanting their followers, and thinking to myself, I'm like, if this technology even became available and the government like realized right off the bat, it's like, we can't have like a bunch of Douglas Quaids thinking they were secret agents on Mars, millions of people at one point in their lives, like this is causing serious problems. Even if they outlawed the technology, people would still use it because it would be like the ultimate LSD DMT trip. It would be the ultimate drug. And yeah, people would still find a way of using it. So like once you release this technology, you couldn't really stop it.
If you had a technology like that and it was widespread, very rapidly, nobody would know what was true and what was not true.
And this got me thinking about this earlier in terms of like how in Western society we view technology, in the sense that like, we think like any technology is good technology, right? It's an improvement on before, thus it's better, right? Where people have this like misunderstanding in terms of like the Amish, like they think like the Amish are like anti-technology or whatever, and it's more complicated than that. Like they look at technology and then they think about the repercussions of what the technology will do to their community, their society, if they use it, right? If I'm not mistaken, like the reason they don't have radios is because they basically came to the conclusion like, oh, if we have radios in our society, less people are going to try to learn to play an instrument. That is true. Like that is true. And to bring it back to what I really wanted to get to is social media. We were talking about this earlier, right? Like it's a technology, it's an advancement, and it can be used for good, right? But it kind of just got unleashed on people, and like you can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? And we didn't really think about the repercussions of releasing this type of technology on the general public, right? And we're seeing it now, right? In terms of like people like getting depressed because of social media, the bullying, the political discourse, the whole 9 yards, right? And would be like something, but nobody, at no point did anybody ask like, okay, like it could be used for these good things, but like, what about the bad things that it could cause, right? And with a technology like this, you would have to have a society, you would hope, that would weigh the pros and cons of like, okay, is this like something that we should put out in the public or not put out in the public? But going by our track record and how our societies run, they would just put it out there and then be like, deal with the consequences after.
And that gets to what really, with technology, you can be like the Amish and try and freeze technology and then try and, modify like the Mennonites, they'll use tractors or whatever, it doesn't. But I think that when technology hits, and we've been hit with so much technology in such a short amount of time, that, we could be generations to just absorb the technology we've been exposed to now. And who knows what could be coming down the pike. But it really has come, like instant communications all around the globe. We don't know what's really going to come out of that.
Well, I mean, we're starting to see some of it now, and it's not good, man. Like the stuff that whatever, I'll admit back in the day, I used to troll. I don't do it anymore, really. I used to troll. I used to I don't know. I just used to kind of getting under people's skin sometimes, nothing serious, and just getting a laugh out of it. You know what I mean? But I now that I've kind of taken a step away from all of that, and for the last 2 years, 3 years or so, and I'm looking at what I see on my Facebook and what people are saying, it's insane. I see people, wishing people to die, people that I would have normal conversations with on Messenger not that long ago, and all different types of other crazy, people wishing that people get thrown into camps, and this is not a good good thing, right? And your terms of technology, I think the next step is going to be it's right before an implant, but I believe the next thing will be virtual reality, and I could see people totally getting lost into that, like a Total Recall, where they live this totally separate life that's all virtual. We see it now with gaming addiction, even social media addiction, where people who have set up this everybody does it to a degree nowadays, if you have access to the internet, but some people are worse than others, where they've set up this kind of false world that they live in on the internet, right? I've met people when I was on Twitter and other social media apps, where I would find out later that they would pay people to follow them, literally pay people to follow them, and this was literally the most important thing in their lives, was this world that they set up on Twitter or Facebook. And it was one of those moments for me where I was like, whoa, this is you know what I mean? This is wild. And virtual reality is just going to make it worse, right? And I'm not gonna lie, to me it would be tempting. I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about virtual reality. I'm like, could you imagine if you could play like a secret agent on Total Recall, in the video game? It'd be tempting, right? Because it'd be oh man, it's better. I worked a blue collar job myself, at Quaid, right? So I work at an auto recycler, and it would be a nice break, just to be oh, I'm gonna play they make a Twin Peaks video game or something like that. I'm oh, I'm going to play Dale Cooper or something like that. But I'm seeing it through his eyes, right? And as somebody who's I was saying, somewhat self-aware about the impact of technology on people, even I'm sitting here and I'm going oh man, that would be tempting. Imagine the people who aren't self-aware, right? They're going to immediately jump into it.
That really gets to what the whole point of the movie, I think, and that's the perfect place to wrap it up, is that there is a really fine line between reality and what essentially is the virtual reality of social media and the internet. It's not reality, but it's not complete virtual reality, but it's something in between that it's a completely new way that humanity has to interact with each other in such a larger way that I think it will take a long time for people for the species really to figure out how to deal with it.